All right. So welcome everyone. Dave gave a little preface around what I'm going to be talking about tonight. So I think in the description for the meeting, I was a little overzealous and I said I was going to talk about source control, infrastructure as code, CI/CD, testing, monitoring, disaster recovery. We'll cover some of those bits, but not everything. I pretty much didn't touch on monitoring. That's a whole other topic, or disaster recovery. I'll add some little notes on that. I realized I didn't include that piece at the end, and most of our focus is going to be on CI/CD because it's challenging with this platform. With the no-code, low-code environment, tends to be something that you have to spend a fair bit of time setting up and understanding how the ecosystem works. So that's what we're primarily going to focus on tonight. Happy to take questions along the way. No guarantees I'll answer them. I am not a Power Platform expert. I'm an expert on DevOps for Power Platform. So if you have specific questions around Power Platform or Dynamics 365, I might have an answer, I might not. But I do know how to build pipelines for it for sure. So I'm Dylan Barry. I am a technical consultant. I work on all kinds of different things. I work on cloud, I work on mobile, I work on DevOps. I do some web development. I tinker with things like IoT and all kinds of, weird side projects. If you want to find more information about me, you can grab my About Me /Dylan Barry link. That's where you can find my Twitter and my bio and a user group that I run, which is the Toronto Mobile .NET developers group. So that's kind of in the Xamarin realm if you have worked with Xamarin or Uno platform or anything along those lines. So that's a little bit about me. So what are we going to talk about today? Really, I've just broken it into three big headlines. We're going to talk about the problems with working with the ecosystem. So Power Platform and Dynamics, like we said, it's no code, low code, which makes it different than traditional dev solutions. You're not working with an IDE and source control. You're working in basically an environment. We're going to talk about the solutions, like really how do we tackle these problems? Because it's a different paradigm, how do we work with it? And then we're going to talk about implementing some of those solutions. So talking about the tools and setup, how we're going to work with solutions, and really there's dual meaning there because we're solving a problem, but the packages that you deal with in Dynamics and Power Platform are called solutions. And we're going to talk about data. Before I get to the next slide, I'm curious how many people have worked with or have experience with or have touched Power Platform or Dynamics. So whether you want to just say in the chat or turn on your mic and we can talk a little bit before we dive into it, but I'm curious of what level I should be talking to. So if people have no experience, I can explain a little bit more. If everybody here or the bulk of the crowd kind of knows what they're talking about to some degree, I can skip over some of the higher level items and we can just talk about the gory details. So we've got a couple of people working with both. Great. Anybody doing DevOps? Anybody working with DevOps actively as they're working with the platform? Cool. We got lots of mixed experience. So happy to hear everybody's experience as we're kind of talking through this as well. So chime in, whether it's with the chat or if you want to turn on your mic. Using it but backwards, some experience with Power BI. Power BI I'm not talking about today. That's a bit of a different beast because it's actually a different product or used to be a different product. So we're primarily focused on the core of Power Platform, which is Power Apps, Power Automate flows, the portals, and those are really the core pieces. I haven't really worked with the automated assistant or some of those other pieces. So it's really around the core. Code promotion using DevOps. So it looks like we've got some people here with good experience, which is great. So we're very happy to hear how you're using things and we can kind of compare notes because there's not really a silver bullet for a lot of these things, and Microsoft gives you some guidance, but they don't necessarily give you the full solution. So it's good to share ideas within people who are working with the platform actively. So this this slide, of course, everybody knows they've probably heard Microsoft hyping the Dynamics 365, the Microsoft 365, and the Power Platform ecosystem. They're really pumping a lot of marketing, like a big marketing push behind this, and for good reason. The low code and no code ecosystem and platforms have got a lot of momentum right now. There's a lot of buzz, and people are adopting them quickly. So you're seeing all kinds of users that normally wouldn't be building cloud applications, cloud native applications, are now able to build cloud native applications on platforms such as the ones Microsoft is offering with Power Platform and Dynamics 365. So people are getting involved. People who may have in the past built access databases and access applications, and that's kind of the way I like to frame this. Is Power Platform tends to be very much like access for the cloud. So kind of in that power user segment. So lots of growth, so good to pay attention to it. Okay, so let's start talking about the problems here. So I like to kick off most of my DevOps presentation with this slide. So currently DevOps is more like a philosophical movement, not yet a precise collection of practices, descriptive or prescriptive. And this is from Gene Kim. Everybody knows and loves Gene Kim and the Phoenix Project and the other Gene Kim books, the Unicorn Project and his DevOps Handbook. So this is particularly important to keep in mind for Power Platform because the flow, the CI/CD like workflow doesn't look like a pure code solution. It's good to keep in mind that, okay, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it just needs to get the job done. You need to have certain rigor and control around what you're doing. And so, you know, you have that standard way of working where you've got things source controlled and you can trace things through from what the developer has written all the way through to production when something is wrong, or if you have to trace what version has been deployed. So those same kind of ideas and really concepts and philosophies are what we're focusing on, not the particular guts of what we're actually working with. Okay, so specific Power Platform challenges. So I mentioned solutions. The solutions are the way we work with code or customizations with within Power Platform and Dynamics 365. There are some specific things around that we have to really pay attention to. Patching is kind of messy. There's the concept of segmentation and layering, which can add complexity. It can also simplify things depending on how you use it. There's the concept of managed and unmanaged solutions. And I know the best practice, if you're working with the platform, the best practice is to use managed solutions, but sometimes you can't. Sometimes you need to use an unmanaged solution. How do you deal with that? We'll talk about tooling. There's some fragmentation around the tooling. There's a lot of official tooling. There's a lot of community tooling. There's also some mixed terminology out there. So some of the baggage or really history that comes with the platform is that it's been around for a very long time. So you'll find different terminology referring to really what could be the same thing. So because Power Platform fell out of the Dynamics world, you'll see a lot of things referred to as XRM, CRM, or Dynamics 365, but when in reality it applies to Power Platform or Dynamics 365. So it's good to know how those kind of fit together. There's also the state of documentation in the ecosystem is a little bit all over the place. I've called Microsoft out on this a couple times because sometimes the documentation is very incorrect, inaccurate. You'll have back and forth with Microsoft reps or support, and things will be out of sync. You get things like there's issues with some of the tooling and there's issues with the platform itself at times. So sometimes you'll see timeouts, sometimes you'll see bugs, sometimes changes will happen that you didn't expect and things just stop working the way they once did. This is kind of the nature of a SaaS environment or PaaS, and this is kind of somewhere in the middle. So it's good to kind of be aware of how those are working and how to deal with it. I'm just going to take a quick peek at the chat here. Gary says, depending on how the solution has been built, means you can add certain elements to a managed solution. Power Apps, buttons that use Power Automate Flows is one of them. Yes, absolutely. We'll talk about some of that fun, some of those fun pieces that you kind of have to work around. The other thing is that becomes important is environments are very stateful, and you have to be very careful about how you're working with environments and being very careful and mindful about how you're capturing state with backup and restore. Creating an environment from scratch, if you've got a solution, can often also be challenging because solutions handle most things that you need to deploy, but as Gary mentioned, there are things that can't be deployed very straightforward with a solution. Sometimes you have to conduct some manual steps. Sometimes you have to write some scripts. So things kind of get interesting when you get into some of the more advanced, like lower level components. So this is kind of my guidance is Dark Helmet's nice quote from Spaceballs, careful you idiot. And this is more advice to myself than anyone else because you have to be super delicate. And when I started working with these tools, I had to keep reminding myself, okay, make sure you have things backed up. Make sure you're not touching anything that anyone else is touching. Basically, you have to be careful. And what I generally like to do when I'm working with building pipelines or building any type of automation is I have a set of DevOps specific environments. So I will make a copy or make a backup restore of the environments that the developers might be using in basically a separate line of environments that I can use for experimenting with my pipelines. And it's very handy because I get to use the replicas of what they do without disrupting anything they're doing. And I can, of course, restore at whatever point I want and do what I need to do without interrupting anybody. So you kind of have to be careful when you work with this because of, like I said previously, the statefulness. So development, like I mentioned earlier, development is an instance. So when you're actually building these apps, you're not working with an IDE, you work with an environment. So you actually are working with the same, you're working within what you're deploying to some degree. So it's not like with traditional web development or traditional application development where you're working with a text editor or IDE. You're in the browser, you're working with tools that are offered to you through the browser. So, and then you don't have to deploy to your development environment. It's immediately there because that's where you've built it. So that's kind of interesting. You have to be aware of how that stacks up and really that it's stateful again. Solution segmentation is pretty important because this is really how you gain efficiency when you have a large team, is making sure that you're strategically segmenting your solutions so that you're not having everybody in one development environment working on one solution, but you can break things into small solutions that play together but don't have dependencies on each other and spread them out over multiple development environments. That gives you the ability to have multiple developers working on your your solution as a whole, or all the bits that are going to come together in your final environments without stepping on each other's toes. That becomes kind of tricky to manage. So there's pros and cons there, something to be aware of. Of course, you're introducing more environments. If you're giving each developer their own environment, there's going to be some challenges around that. And of course, making sure you're not taking dependencies where you don't expect and things like that. Solution layering is the next piece of that. That's basically having base solutions and building on top of them. So stacking your customizations on top of each other. This is a little tricky as well. And if you miss dependencies or don't have things deploying in the right sequence, you could run into problems as well. So another area where it can be pretty tricky because you don't necessarily know where those dependencies are when you start working with this. You basically have to deploy, and the deployment report gives you the idea of where your dependencies are missing. There's no direct Git integration. So we talked about the instance being your IDE. I work with some other no code, low code solutions as well. the one that comes to mind first is Azure Data Factory. So Azure Data Factory, when you work with Azure Data Factory, you can integrate directly with Git and have your changes saved back to your Git repo, which is great. It's like working in an IDE. We don't have that with Power Platform or Dynamics 365, so we have to work kind of around it or find more creative ways to get our solution code into source control. This one's tricky, and this is really how I got involved. The first client that I had working with this product reached out to me because they had built a very like a preliminary pipeline, a very simple pipeline to do some of their work, and it broke because a policy was put in place to enable MFA. So as soon as you turn on MFA and you're using just a regular user, it breaks everything. The MFA can't run, the MFA enabled accounts can't run any automation. So I was brought in to start investigating using service principal. And so it was funny when I started into this, and I'm sure other people who have been involved know that a lot of the tooling didn't support service principals. Now, Microsoft's recommendation is use service principals wherever you can, where it's systems talking to systems, yet the Power Platform Dynamics ecosystem did not support it at all. I ended up hand rolling some tools for that, which was not very fun. And it was not very fun because I had to do some reverse engineering. That in itself is not very fun. And it also wasn't very fun because it seemed like the minute I had it complete and working, that Microsoft released updates to their tools that worked with service principals. So that was a little interesting, but yeah, so their tooling is getting better at supporting service principals, which is excellent. And that's why I say the SPN approach has some limitations, because you can still see things evolving and changing like on a pretty rapid basis. So it's a good thing that they're working on it, and it's a good thing that they're moving more towards service principals. James says, we have had many headaches with MFA using Azure Active Directory security default, so we can't disable MFA for service accounts. Yeah, that's the thing. Service accounts are not going to get you very far. You're pretty much going to have to use service principals, particularly in that case, and it's the better practice anyways. So let's talk about some solutions. Before that, I'm going to have a drink of water. Is there any questions on everything I've rambled about so far? I only have like a few more slides to kind of breeze through, and then I'll get into demos.
Can you hear me?
You're very quiet.
Darren, can you hear me?
You're very quiet.
Oh, it's sorry, hang on 1 second.
Good, gives me an opportunity to get some water.
Better now? Is my volume better?
Slightly.
Okay, you know what? Let me fix this. You go on.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so solutions. Let's talk about automating some of this. So if you've ever seen this meme, I'm sure everybody who's been on the internet has seen this meme. All right, Vic. Vic's gonna fix his mic and ask his question. So yeah, Vic, interrupt me when your mic's ready. I know this is all too critical. Okay. So yeah, automate. Let's do some automation. Automate all the things. So first off, when you're automating in this environment, set your expectations. So the first thing I would recommend, if you're working with this platform, have a good relationship with support, understand how to open support tickets quickly and easily while capturing all the information it would take to reproduce the issue, and know your escalation route. So it helps to be in contact with Microsoft, to be partnered with Microsoft if you're delivering any major solutions on Power Platform or Dynamics 365. Because you can move the needle. I've done it myself. With some of the problems I've had, I raise it up high enough and it gets attention and I get results. So be the squeaky wheel when it comes to this stuff. It'll help everybody. So make sure you know your communication routes to escalate things. And yeah, communication is another thing. And really that comes down to the other way around too. So make sure your stakeholders kind of understand when something breaks that, hey, this is a SaaS product. We can't control this whole ecosystem, and set their expectations as well. So that's pretty important, some of the soft pieces around this. I know this isn't a super technical topic, but it's important to understand this and important to keep it in mind. And then expect to do some things manually. There are simply some things that don't really work the way you'd want them to automated. Gary has linked to a Power Platform concept of system app users. Yes, we're going to go in depth into that, Gary, because I think that is a very important piece to touch on. So we'll go into some detail on that. So yeah, expectations, basically be prepared to have some problems and do some things manually. So talking about the process and what we're going to automate. So the first thing that we're going to do is get the code into source control, and how we're going to do that is using an export process. So we're basically going to write a pipeline that will export our solution package and then commit it to Git. So we have it in source control. So that's the first piece. So get it into source control. The next piece is build, packaging, and deploying. So that's the process of taking what was in source control and getting it ready and deploying it. The other thing that we're going to look at is base data. So we can call this many different things. We could call it configuration data, you could call it seed data, but this is really data that you'd want to have live in source control, like your seed scripts that you'd have for a SQL database that you'd be pushing into production. So same kind of idea. And then the last piece is really understanding the environment state and really being aware of that. I'm really going to press on this piece because environment state is one of the trickiest pieces when working with this ecosystem. You really have to keep it in mind at all times. I'm going to breeze through this because this is just a few links here. So this is basically some guidance around application lifecycle management for Power Platform. So they're DevOps concepts. They've just recently put out some documentation on how to use GitHub Actions to deploy your solutions. I haven't looked too closely at this. I just saw the article and I went, this is interesting. I will put this in my slide deck. So there you go. If you're using GitHub or are interested in using GitHub, there's some pseudo support for this. I think it's in preview. This piece is a little more important. This is I've got it in quotes, the SDK, because it's really just a collection of random utilities. The one that we're going to focus on here and the one that I've used most is the configuration migration utility. It's pretty important in terms of managing data. So we'll take a look at that. PowerShell is my absolute bread and butter when it comes to DevOps in the Microsoft ecosystem. I don't like Bash. Well, I shouldn't say I don't like Bash. I prefer PowerShell to Bash. So I use PowerShell a lot. I've used it a lot throughout my career, and it really helps you get your job done better if you can use it. Dave is chiming in the chat, and he's a fan too. I'm going to highlight a specific library here. This is Sean. He works at Microsoft. I've had some really positive interactions with him because he maintains an open source library on GitHub that it's a set of PowerShell commandlets, a module, and it's saved me in so many different ways. So Sean does some great stuff. His PowerShell module, the Microsoft XRM Data PowerShell, is fantastic. He is responsive to tickets. If you have issues, you can also raise them through support. And yeah, it's great. So that one I'm going to put an extra highlight on. Other tools, I think I was planning on putting more on the slide and just went, no, this is good enough. XRM Toolbox. So XRM Toolbox has a variety of utilities that you can use to work with the various aspects of the platform. We'll touch on, I can't remember what the tool is called because I don't use it that often, but I've got it loaded up and we'll take a look at kind of querying data in a SQL format. Okay, let's get into it. So this is the implementation. So how are we going to build this continuous integration delivery pipeline? I guess let me stop again quickly. Any more questions, comments, anything at this point? I'm sure people will have some as I start demoing, and that's going to come up soon. Next slide, I start demoing.
There's really just a lot of arguing about Bash versus PowerShell.
I see
and
that,
XRM
yeah.
toolbox is amazing.
Yeah, the Fetch XML plugin Gary has mentioned, and yeah,
Fetch XML, yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty fantastic. I didn't realize that existed, and I was handwriting it for the longest time, and then I was like, of course there's a tool for this, and of course I didn't know about it. Okay, so high level steps, what are we gonna do? We are going to get some setup done. So this is really getting us set up so we can talk to Power Platform from Azure DevOps. So we're gonna create an app registration. We're gonna grant Power Platform the app registration access to Power Platform. We're gonna add an application user in our environment. We're going to add a service connection in Azure DevOps, and we're going to add a variable group in Azure DevOps. We have to add both. There's some reason behind that, and I'll get into that once we kind of cross that bridge. This AKA MS link is really where you go to start to do some of these steps. It doesn't cover everything, so just something to keep in mind that you might want to pay attention to what I'm doing, because I've got scars from some of this. All right. Let's get to demoing. Bear with me for one moment. I'm just going to kind of flip some things around. Just one moment here. I thought I was set up for this, apparently not. Okay, here we go. Okay, can everybody see my Windows desktop?
Yes.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, first thing I need to do is see if my instances are in better shape than they were. Yes, they are, good. Okay, so the first thing that we're gonna do is we're going to look at that AKA MS link for the build tools. So I'm gonna bring that up and we'll take a quick look at what's in there. So this is Microsoft's official documentation on how to use application lifecycle management with the ecosystem. The piece that we're going to focus on here is the configure service connections using a service principal. So this is pretty key. Now they've hidden this nice little link here to a, sorry, these are step-by-step instructions. What I meant to say is they've got a nice little link here to a PowerShell script file. And this is a script file that you can run if you have enough permission in your Azure Active Directory tenant. So you might have to ask for help from a global administrator or somebody with better access into Azure Active Directory. But you can run this script, and it will create your application registration, grant it all the proper API permissions that you need to use it to talk to Power Platform. So I have the script open, and I've done some modifications to this. Nothing big. I'll touch on here. So if you have trouble with this app, or if you have trouble with this, so first thing you should realize is there's currently a bug in this module, the Microsoft Power Apps Administration PowerShell module. So I would suggest if you're downloading it, make sure you're pinning to the max version of 2.0.102. The latest version, which is 2.0.108, has a bug in it that causes some pretty significant issues. It basically blocks you, stops you in your tracks, and will cause issues down the line. So basically, that was the first piece, and then I've got a try catch here around actually using one of those commandlets. This new CRM management app commandlet was failing, so I had to put a try catch around it just to say that it failed when it did, so I could get the output at the end. I also formatted this a little bit so it's a little easier to pick out. So this basically goes and does all the setup with AAD that you need. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run this. So it's pretty straightforward to run. I need to move some windows around. Bear with me a minute. This might get ugly. I don't know how this is going to look. Okay, now I'm set again. Okay, so I'm going to run this script. So we're going to run the active file here. And actually, sorry, I should have done this from an actual terminal. It doesn't play nicely with font size. So Gary, I will send you this. I will send this link in the chat because it's really, I'm not going to get into a lot of detail on what's in this file. So there it is, but we're going to run this. Okay, so I think that was actually the last, yeah, so the last command I ran, I'm just gonna run it again. So this is the file that came from here. I just modified like 2 small things. Not a big deal, shouldn't impact anyone. So I'm gonna run this, and what it's gonna do is it's gonna prompt me. Actually, might not, oh yes it will. It's gonna prompt me for credentials. I'm going to use a account that has enough privilege on my tenant to make some of these changes. That is not the password. So connected to my tenant. Oh, I've got hard-coded values. Whoops. My bad. That's what happens when I mess with scripts 5 minutes before a presentation. Okay, let me run that again. Okay, so it's prompting me. I'm going to put in my credentials, and it's going to spit out my tenant ID, application ID, and application secret. As you can see, there's no errors here. So I've got this script has run successfully. Oops, I keep hitting, I'm on a Mac, so I keep hitting the wrong shortcut key. If you're wondering why the start menu is continuously popping up. Okay, so we're gonna grab that and we're gonna use that to create our, application user and create our service connection and variable group. But before I do that, we're gonna go into the Azure portal, into our app registrations. And yeah, here's our 2 app registrations, which I created a minute apart. Yep, so we'll take the newer one. And we're gonna go into API permissions. And we're gonna grant consent on Power Platform. Great. And then we're gonna go to the Overview tab here. And we're gonna go to the Managed Application ID. This brings us to the underlying service principal. We're gonna go to Permissions. And we're gonna grant admin consent for Power Platform here as well. And this is gonna prompt me with a nice OAuth dialog here. Give permission to the app or to the enterprise application, which is our service principal. So, okay, we've just given it access to everything it needs within our tenant. So now it can access the components from Power Apps and Power Platform that we need. some of the CDS stuff, and some of the Microsoft Graph APIs as well. So that gives us the ability to do what we need from DevOps. So now I'm going to go into DevOps here. Actually, before I go into DevOps, what we're going to do is we're going to go into our environments. I should follow my script that I've built for myself so I don't get into trouble here. Okay, so I have 4 environments. I set up an emergency build too in case I needed it. I'm going to open these up. I'm going to open these each in a tab. It's going to be very slow. Gary, you're asking, is the app name configurable? Not with that script. You could rewrite the script to take in an app name. I've done that before, but they've updated the script a couple times, so I just used the freshest version from a couple days ago. So my custom parameter to have a name come in is not in that version. Okay, so I've got the build environment, my QA environment, and I closed my dev environment because I got a little too excited. So what we're going to do is we're going to give that application, that app registration, we're going to give it access to all 3 of our environments. Normally you wouldn't do it like this. You would have an app registration per environment, or maybe a collection of environments. Generally what I like to do is give the dev environment, so anything that's in like the dev purview that doesn't have anything being deployed to it, like in a kind of off limits, like kind of hands off. I give 1 service principal for, so dev, build, any POC or experimental environments or anything like that would get 1 service principal, 1 app registration, then every other environment will get its own. For purposes of this demo, we're going to go the easy way. Okay, so I'm going to open this up. So we're going into the dev environment. I'm going to go over here to my settings. I'm going to go to advanced settings. And you can see right here, like I'm in Power Platform, but this is clearly a Dynamics URL. I'm going to go to security and go to users. And then from this dialog, this is pretty important here, make sure you select application users and click new. You can see I've got a stale one in there. So the only thing you need to fill out on here, they've just changed this form, thankfully, because you used to have to fill out a whole bunch of bits of information in here. But really, the only thing you need to supply, get this up and running, is the application ID. So you grab the application ID, put it in here, and hit save. So when you hit save, it communicates with Azure Active Directory to get the rest of this metadata for this user. Great. The next thing we have to do is give this account system admin access. So scroll to the bottom, system admin, okay. So while that's saving, I'm going to do that same thing, that same boring task for these other environments. I'm going to close some of these off because we don't need them and they're going to be in the way. Okay, back to advanced settings. Everybody gets to see this 3 times, so I hope it sticks. Bring it up on this instance too. These instances are cold, so they're not responding super snappy. This one I restored from backup like just before the session started, so that one is really cold. Security, users. Back into application users. Gary, gotta love the UI consistency. no doubt, things jumping around. We'll put our application ID in, and this is our QA environment. So this is essentially what we're going to do. Is we're going to move our application from dev to QA. That's our goal here. So we've set it up in dev, set up our application user in dev. We've now set it up in QA. Finally, we can set it up in build. Sorry, that was so slow. I wish that was warmed up ahead of time. Unfortunately, I realized that I hadn't restored some of my environments until last minute. Gary, I also used to have pains with SharePoint. So James Schwartz also used to work with SharePoint. I know that. Dave, I know you've touched it. Max, I know you've touched it. Everybody's got scars from SharePoint.
And deploying CRM.
CRM and SharePoint.
Are you saying this is
Everybody great
a
plans.
SharePoint?
What's that, Max?
Are you saying this is as painful in SharePoint? Because it definitely reminds me of SharePoint.
Yes. Yeah, I'd actually argue that it might be more painful because it's cloud. Now, I'm not going to get too, like, if you let me get bash happy on this technology, I'll go forever. So I'm going to be careful. Okay, so we've got our apps ready to go, and they're registered. We've got our application users ready to go. And Corey says, I feel like I don't have to grant the admin consent when setting up the app registration. Is that something specific to the build pipeline? Yeah, it becomes pretty important because what they're doing is giving more permissions at this point to what we're doing in Power Platform. So some things like the backup functionality, copy environment, which actually still doesn't work to my knowledge, but some of that functionality that didn't previously work from using app registration, they're currently building that in. So you want to make sure you grant those permissions and make sure it's good and has everything that you expect it to. That service outage from Azure DevOps is the usual Mac agent issue. Okay, so I'm creating my service connection. We're going to create a service connection. We're going to use the type Power Platform. So if you put in Power, you can see that I previously had the public preview. So we're going to take the special type of service connection for Power Platform, plug this in. So then we're going to plug in, we're going to create 3 of these, one for each URL that we've stood up, but with the same tenant ID, application ID, and client secret. So the reason why I changed that output is so it's really easy to copy and paste into the description field and then divvy it up, because I'm really lazy and I don't want to go back to VS Code more than once. Careful not to copy any spaces or weird characters when you're putting anything in there. There we go. So we've got that piece, and then we're going to grab our URL. I should have actually grabbed those at the moment, and I'm now frustrated with myself for not doing that. I'm just going to grab one of them. I'm very lazy and I don't want to typo. So I'm just going to copy directly from the portal itself. I'm actually just going to copy this. I don't know what kind of weird things that we'll copy the link. I don't know why I was hesitating on that. Okay, so server URL. So this is our dev instance. I'm actually just going to throw that in here, grab this. Okay, so we've got a service connection. This has our development URL that we got from Power Platform admin right here, environment URL. We have our tenant ID that came from the command line. We have our application ID that came from that script. The client secret that came from the script. We give it a name. I'm just doing this the same as the environment. We're granting it permission. Description doesn't really matter. We're going to click save. Never Create a new service connection. So I have to do this 3 times, unfortunately. So even though I'm actually using the same credentials, I still have to have individual instances of this, which is, fine. Did I click save and it saved those credentials? Is that what just happened? That's interesting. Matt says, automated this initial setup as well using PowerShell script and multiple pipelines. Since trial environments cannot be restored from backups, this allows us to spin up a new environment on demand without paying for sandboxes. Nice. Okay, so this one is going to be my build environment. This all could easily be automated, easily. Like I said, if it's changed a little recently, so I'm not using my comprehensive script, and my comprehensive script stopped working a couple days ago, and I need to go back and fix it. So, which probably, would take the same amount of time as me plugging in these values manually, unfortunately. It's one of those things, you do it once, do it more than once, you should automate it. Yeah, I'm feeling that pain right now. Okay, so our second one. And our final pipeline, or our final service connection. This one's going to be our QA environment. QA. Oops. And grab those credentials one more time. No, I didn't ask for that. Okay, now this exciting work is done, thankfully. Yeah, the CLI has really great services for wiring all these up. You can actually just post a JSON to the API, and it does it for you. Okay, so the last thing that we want to do here is we're going to go into our library. We've already got an existing library here, and I'm going to plug in the application ID and application secret, or client ID, client secret is what I'm going to call it here. So client, I see this is why you should automate it. So you don't have to watch me typo it 15 times. Client ID, client secret. Good. This out of there. Make this a secret. Great. So I'm going to save this. So now we've got a variable group with our client ID and client secret that can be used with all 3 of those environments, and we have service connections. We'll get to some of the why we're using it in 2 different ways down the line here. Okay, so that is how you configure a all the connectivity between Azure DevOps and your instances. Now you can start communicating. So now we're going to move on to the second demo. So instead of flipping back to the slide deck, the connection type, yes, sorry, that's my mistake. I meant to touch on that. So this is from the marketplace. This is called Power Platform Build Tool. So when you install the Power Platform, if you typo it, platform build. Power Platform build tools, it comes with a special connection type and a bunch of other tasks. So you definitely want to install this. This is going to be key. I will paste this in the chat. So Power Platform build tools, we're going to be leveraging these quite heavily. All right, so yeah, like I said, I'm not going to jump back to slides. I'm just going to talk just for a minute here on what we're going to do next. So next piece, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to build our export pipeline and then build our, or create our export pipeline, then create the package and deploy pipeline. So we're going to start with export. And so we're going to create a pipeline here. I'm not going to be using YAML much to Max's chagrin because I wanted this to be a little more visual. So I'm going to use the classic editor. I do have some YAML that I posted up to GitHub, and I'll share the link to that later. But caveat, I haven't tested it at all. I exported it, I fixed it up a little bit and ran out of time to test it. So use at your own peril. Okay, so we're going to use our team project. We're going to use main. Great. So this is all just the defaults. I'm going to start with an empty job here. So we're going to call this export solution. And we're going to use a Windows 2019 agent. And we're going to go into our job here. And this is important. Don't miss this step. Go into your job and make sure that you can allow scripts access to the OAuth token. And this is because we're going to be interacting with the Git repos in Azure DevOps. And we want to make sure we have that token so we can easily interact with those repos. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up a couple of variables. Actually, I think just one. Solution name. And we're going to set this to default. So I've got just a template app from April as part of the Power Platform. She's a Power Platform MVP, I believe. I can't even remember her last name at this current point. She has a bunch of apps on her GitHub. I grabbed one of them and installed them into the dev environment. So we're going to be working with one called Conference App. So that's our solution name. Now we're going to start adding tasks. So the first task we're going to add, and this is always when you're working with those April Dunham. Yes, thank you, Gary. Gary, you win a beer. Dave's going to get it for you. The first thing that you need to do when you're using any of these tasks is use the Power Platform tool installer. And what this does is it's a PowerShell script behind the scenes that just basically grabs a bunch of dependencies from NuGet and puts them on the build agent so you can use them in your subsequent steps. So these are kind of your prereqs. Next thing that we're going to do is we're going to use export solution. So I'm going to add that. So I'm just going to add a bunch in here and then we're going to go about configuring them. So export, then we're going to unpack. So install the tools, export the solution from our environment, unpack the solution that we've exported. Then we're going to run some PowerShell. So I'm going to put 2 PowerShell tasks in here. And we're going to rename those and then I'll drop in bits afterwards. So the first thing that we're going to do here is we're going to check out the export branch. We'll talk about what that is in a second. And then we're going to commit. So the Power Platform tool installer, this doesn't really need anything changed unless you're pinning to a specific version, and then you can uncheck this and you can tell it what specific versions of the individual PowerShell tools that these tasks are using, or different dependency versions. We're just going to use default for our purposes here. Export solution, what we're going to do here is we're going to take, well, first of all, we're going to switch over to service principal. So because it supports MFA. This is relatively new. I think they added this back in the summer. So yeah, we're going to look at dev. So we're going to export our solution from the dev environment, and we're going to use our solution name. So solution name, just from our variable that we had defined, and then our solution output. I'm going to copy paste this. It's going to go into our, into our binaries directory. We're going to put our solution name. So basically what this task is going to do, it's going to pick up our solution by the name of conference app, and it's going to output it to conferenceapp.zip in the bin directory here. Notice that we're keeping this async export because this allows for longer running operations. So it basically is a way of getting around timeouts, or it's a little more forgiving. It's CQRS instead of synchronously waiting for the call to complete. And then export as managed, we're keeping this unchecked because we're going to deal with the solution code in an unmanaged way. That's basically where you have to stay, where you have to keep the solution unmanaged to continue making changes to it. So if you took a managed solution and put it in source control, you wouldn't be able to change it anymore. You could repack it and deploy it, but you'd have to create another solution to further customize it. All right, unpack solution. So this is same kind of thing. We're going to give it an input file, and so that's our same file that we just pulled down, and a target folder. So we're kind of going backwards of a normal build flow because we're flowing from an environment to the binaries directory to the sources directory. So we're basically going to create a folder for our solution in the sources directory. So the next thing that we're going to do is in our checkout export branch, I am going to paste in some nice source code here, some PowerShell code. So we're going to use inline, and I'm going to drop this in here. So what this is doing, I'll expand this out so we can all see. This indenting is awful. I can't multi-line select. Great, whatever. So we're declaring the solution name and an export branch name. Our export branch name is our solution name and our build ID. And then we're changing directory to the sources directory. We're then setting our git config, and we're just using a fake user here, the export pipeline, and just to signify where it's coming from. And then we're going to check out our source branch, and we're going to check out a new branch with the name of our export branch. So we're going to create a new branch called export conference app dash whatever our build number will be. I think it's like we're in the 110 range, something along those lines. Then the next thing that we do here is we're going to actually push the code upstream. So push it into our repo over here that we'll look at in a minute using our access token. So we're just basically going to push that branch in. So that's setting up our branch. And then the next thing that we do after we set up our branch is, again, some more PowerShell. And this is just to commit that code. So again, changing directories, adding all the files, committing what we have, and then pushing that up. Any questions or comments on this? I'm going to save this. I'm actually going to save and queue this right off the bat. Questions, comments, anything? Okay.
Hey, Darren, this is Vic. Can you hear me now?
Hey, Vic. Yeah, much better.
Okay. So I'm not, so, this is coming from an infrastructure background. Like our team is kind of new to Power Platform and we're tasked with this whole thing. These concepts seem a little foreign, at least to me in our team. So like this, Git thing and all this stuff. So is there like, a Microsoft, like is Microsoft do a good job of covering it in the learn.microsoft thing or?
Yeah, like to learn Git?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because all this seems new and kind of lost.
Yeah, like working with Git, like if you haven't worked with Git before, that's a great place to start, is making sure that you're comfortable with Git. So Microsoft has pretty good documentation on Microsoft Learn. Atlassian has pretty good documentation on their website. They make Jira and Confluence and Bitbucket, things like that. So they've got pretty good documentation as well. There's lots of courses available. You can look on YouTube, and you know, there's lots of community-made Git tutorials and things like that that can help you get ramped up. So yeah, having strong Git skills, I think, is pretty key for doing anything around really modern automation or anything that's based on DevOps in the modern age is going to be based in Git, right? That's where your source is going to live. So having a strong foundation and a strong knowledge of Git is pretty important.
Okay, and before just going back when I was trying to fix my mic, you know, our strategy is we have 3 different tenants, one for ISD testing, one for UAT, and for prod. And we are only giving the Power Platform maker rights in the ISD tenant. And our idea is to promote the code from the ISD tenant to the UAT tenant and have the business groups do the testing in the UAT tenant and then promote it from UAT to prod. So 3 different Azure/O365 tenants. And the promotion is going to happen across those.
It seems kind of heavy. You could probably simplify that down to 1. I've got a couple clients working with pretty complex solutions where it's you have to prove that the developers have no access to production, and it's all running in the same tenant. So use Active Directory groups just to lock that down rather than have tenant segregation. It seems a little too heavy.
Mm-hmm.
That would be my suggestion.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we just forced to go through that because of our we are a financial institution, so there's a lot of security concerns. So
yeah, you can be compliant with only 1 tenant though. So I would suggest try and get away from using the 3 tenants. It's going to add a ton of overhead, particularly if you have to start looking at integration. So like if you have to integrate with any PaaS services or anything like that, you're going to add a ton of overhead by having 3 tenants. It's just going to make things cumbersome and tricky to deal with. It's going to be way easier having everything in 1 tenant.
And then do the security training using security groups?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so this export is running. The Azure DevOps UI here did some funny things. So I'm going to let that run, and we're going to work on our next pipeline. So our next pipeline is going to be the build. So let's put that together. Create a new pipeline. Same thing, classic editor. I can feel Max cringing right now. So same defaults here.
I'm glad you can do it.
I do have YAML, I promise you. Where is it? It's in this other instance of VS Code, which is going to struggle to come up. So I've got some YAML files and some scripts that I'll share. It's on my my GitHub. But like I said, YAML's untested. I wanted it to be true to what I was demoing, and I can't. There's only so much you can prepare when you're prepping for a demo. Okay, so this is going to be build solution. It'd be really great if I could spell also. Build solution, spell, type, all those various things. Okay, so we've got that. We've got our agent set. I'm going to set a variable here again. It's going to be the same variable, just solution name. See, if I was using YAML, I could have reused the same template file, right, Max?
See, I'm just gonna keep quiet.
I mean, I don't like it either. It's just more visual.
It's not easy though, but yeah, I'm trying.
No, heckle, please. I encourage heckling. If
No,
anybody would like to
I
unmute and
understand
heckle me actively.
The classic pipelines are just better for the demo, right? It's more visual.
It's way more visual. That's really what
They definitely demo better.
If you're going to watch me code, everybody's just going to go to sleep. Everybody's probably going to sleep. Everybody went to sleep when I created all those service connections. So I'm already fighting an uphill battle right now. Okay, so Power Platform Pack solution.
Yeah, I almost
Sorry, Max?
when you said SharePoint, so.
Yeah. Okay, so install Pack solution. We're going to run the Power Platform solution checker. Then we're going to run the backup. I'm so thankful that they have the backup working. It wasn't working for a long time, and we had to do that manually. It was very frustrating. And then we're going to run import. Where is import? Import right at the very top. Import a solution. So back it up. Then we're going to import. Then we are going to publish our customizations. Publish customizations. And lastly, we are going to export. So why are we importing and then exporting? Well, this is the magic of the Power Platform build process. So we're taking, as you remember in the export, and hopefully this all ran the way we expected, yep. So we exported here and we exported the solution as unmanaged. So we grabbed the conference app, and I guess I probably should have given everybody a quick glimpse of that app. So let's quickly do that right now. So the conference app that was sitting in dev is unmanaged, so you can work on it. And sorry, I wanted to go to make Power Apps. So we've got our apps here. This is our build environment, so there's no apps there. So in our dev instance, we have our event schedule and our conference scheduler and our conference admin app. So we've got a little app here. I should have hit the play button. Oh no, I'm moving too fast. So this is the conference app. This probably looks very familiar to people who have participated in a Microsoft conference recently. So this is the conference app. You've got your different agenda, your schedule, session scheduler, FAQs, a video hub. It's a great little app, great for demoing. And we're taking this out. So this is unmanaged, which means you can continue to customize this. It's open for customization. And what we're going to do is we're extracting it. And then we're committing that. We're extracting it as a zip file. We're unzipping it, so unpacking it. We're committing it to source, so it gets committed as a set of XML files into your Git repo, and that's unmanaged. So then you can take that unmanaged, you can pack it again as an unmanaged solution. Unmanaged solution. I don't want to use the word package. An unmanaged solution zip, and you can deploy it to another environment, and it goes into that environment as unmanaged. When you take it out of the environment, so in this case, our build environment, you have the option to choose whether you're going to take it out as unmanaged or lock it as managed. So if you export it as managed, it means that no further customization is necessary. You have to layer onto the solution, but you can't modify the original components. So we're going to use a managed solution. So we're going to take it out of build so people can't mess with the solution once we get it out of our build environment. So we get a managed package, and then we can deploy that package to the QA environment. So that's essentially what we're doing now with this new build pipeline. And that's really the build process. It's converting that unmanaged solution to managed. So let's do this really quickly. I've got values that I can copy paste in here, so you don't have to watch me type. Nobody wants to watch me make 15 typos. So you can see we're specifying right here, as we're packing the solution, we're telling the packing tool that this is an unmanaged solution. We're then going to run the Power Platform checker. This basically does some analysis on the solution to make sure that nothing is out of whack with it. Power Platform checker. We are going to use our zip file, solution zip. We're going to use our default solution checker rule set. Power Platform backup environment. This one is very key. Like I said, environments are stateful, and your build environment, if you have to run this a second time because something went wrong, you're going to want to restore from backup. So this is pretty key, making sure you have this step working the way you'd expect. Import solution. So let's go in here. We're going to use build again. Oops. Matt, would you typically reset, restore the build environment before deploying the unmanaged solution to ensure it's being deployed to a clean environment, or is that step unnecessary? Matt, that really depends on what you're doing with your solution, because if you're talking about layering, you definitely don't want to reset if you're layering. So I'm not doing it here. We're not layering, but just seemed unnecessary in the demo. I was anticipating this question from you. So in short, it depends. Really depends on what your solution looks like, your holistic solution looks like. I've been working with a client that needs to patch, and patching means it's cumulative, so you can't reset. Vic, yes, backs up the whole environment. Corey looks like he has something interesting to say, but I'm going to finish my task and get this running before I read it. Okay, so we've got our, so basically we take our solution, we pack it, we check it, we back up our environment, we import the solution, we publish the customizations in the environment. So this is all using the build environment. Then we export it as managed. So then we get a managed zip at the end. And then what we're going to do here, the last thing we need to do is we need to publish our artifact. So you can see in the export step here, I'm already putting in the staging directory, and then when we publish, it automatically comes from the staging directory, and away we go. So let's queue this. So I'm going to save and queue this, and I'm going to show you a trick here. So I'm not going to queue this from main, because when we ran this branch, or when we ran this pipeline, it created a branch for us called export conference app 11 or 111. So this is because I'm used to a flow where, and I think most of us are who are using Git, are used to a flow where you commit into a branch and then you PR that branch into your main collaboration area, your main collaboration branch, whether that's main or master or development or whatever it may be. So generally what I do is after I do this checkout export branch and commit, I would open a PR right from the pipeline here. And then the team would be notified that there was a PR that they had to review. So then they would have the opportunity to look at the solution and make any changes at that point or reject it or whatever they need to do. So I recommend that. I recommend keeping it in a branch. So what we're going to do on the, as we're building, so the main branch doesn't have the code, the export app, the export branch does. So we're going to grab the export branch and we're going to save and run. So this all looks good. Hopefully I haven't made any mistakes in my pipeline. This is weird. Look at this weird UI thing I've got. Now everything is locked. I can't do anything. Funny. Okay, we'll go back to pipelines and watch it run this way. Okay, so that's that piece. Now, while that's running, we're going to put a release pipeline together. Again, I can feel Max just going, what is Dylan doing? I thought this guy knew how to do DevOps. He's not writing YAML. Never inviting him back again. Maybe that's on purpose, Max. Maybe I didn't want an invite back. I kid.
You make
All right.
it sound like some kind of a YAML Nazi or something.
Never, I would never do that. So this is deploy. We'll call this solution deploy. I like YAML much better, to be quite frank. Having your pipeline version along with your source is a no-brainer to me. We'll save this right off the bat. I'm gonna add my artifact and we'll give this our build solution pipeline. Cool, that all looks good. Click add. We're gonna go into our QA stage, into the job here, and we're once again gonna use those Power Platform build tools. So we're gonna put our tools in, and then we are going to import. That's actually, sorry, we're going to put our tools in, we're gonna back up. So we're going to back up our target environment too. Our target environment in this case is QA. And then we're going to import. So MFA enabled, QA, great. We're using the default label because we don't really care. But you can change that to make it more meaningful. QA here as well, and then our solution input file, which is in our working directory. This is our artifact. Drop is the name of our artifact from our build, and then solution name.zip. So we need our solution name over here.
Did you increment the version number on the solution itself?
I did not. Didn't cover that.
Okay.
That is something helpful you could potentially do. Generally, what I've seen is the development team takes care of cloning themselves. So if they want to clone a solution and roll things up and have everything that they no longer need deleted, they generally do that housekeeping themselves. So that hasn't been in my purview. Okay, so now we've got our build running here. As soon as this runs, we can then kick off our release. So this should take a couple more minutes. So in the meantime, let's start talking about the next piece. So the next piece we want to do, so this is going to take care of our solution. This is going to get our solution all the way through to QA. Basically those three pieces we made. So we built, just to recap again, let's go look at our pipelines. So we built our export pipeline. Our export pipeline takes the solution and puts it into source control, into Git. Our build solution takes the solution from Git, puts it in our build environment as unmanaged, and then exports it as a managed solution package. And then that solution package is available as an artifact. So our release can take it and push it into our target environment, whatever our target environment may be. In our case, we've just got a QA stage, but you could have whatever stages you want. So you could take that package and push it anywhere you might need to deploy. So that is the total cycle of how the solution deployment works, aside from some fun things that we will see once we actually get this deployed. So while this is running, this is a good time for any questions. Does anybody have any questions, comments? No, silence is golden.
I know I've seen that pattern, and we've used it too with the build environment. What are the obvious advantages of having a build environment versus just exporting from dev again as a managed solution?
If you are layering solutions, if you're using layering and segmentation, mostly layering, you can have everything amassed in your build environment. Make sure you're not missing any dependencies before you move forward.
Gotcha.
So that's a big thing. You can also test data deployment if you want to make sure you're not missing anything from that perspective. We're going to get into data deployment next. That's really, so the build environment, I'm hounding Microsoft to fix this because the build environment is very stateful. Every time I have to use it and deal with it, it becomes, every time something goes wrong, the build environment tends to be your bottleneck. So what I generally do in my pipelines, in my YAML pipelines, Max, I have the build environment as flexible as possible. So it's basically a parameter I can take in at queue time. So I will generally take the build environment, and when I'm working with it, I'll copy it to another net new environment and work with it there. So I'm not interfering with anything else that's going on in the regular development workflow. So that's one of the things that I find it very, because it's so stateful, it becomes very rigid and becomes like a bit of a bottleneck for everything. So yeah, Microsoft, I had a conversation with Microsoft. They are working on something, I don't know what, but apparently they're going to be improving that. I might be tempted to use a little bit more of the managed flow if you have simple enough solutions. So if you're not using layering, you can probably get away with exporting both managed and unmanaged. Although that's kind of funny too, right? Because then you're essentially committing 2 copies of the same code in different forms to your source code repo. But it is what it is. It's like going back to that Gene Kim slide. It's not going to be perfect. Okay, so we're good here. So this means our solution was deployed to our build environment. Now we have a drop artifact available. So if we look at our build here, we've got a couple artifacts, we've got code analysis. So this is kind of interesting. There is a Seraph viewer in the marketplace that you can install. So when you run this build, it'll give you another tab on your build itself. I should have actually installed that. I don't know why I didn't. Does this automatically find it? No. So you can have another tab here that gives you the Power Platform checker results here in a nice graphical format, like a nice report format in that Seraph file. So I recommend that. Seraph Viewer, I think it's called. But our drop here has, yeah, basically our Power App checker results and our conference app. So now we're going to take that conference app and we're going to deploy it to our environment using our release. Close some of these tabs. So we're going to create a release. We're going to pick up our latest build. Hope that this one goes as well as our previous 2. Okay, so this is deploying. There's one more thing we want to do once this deploys. I'm hoping this is pretty quick. I think it is. Thank you, Gary. So Gary just posted a link to the Seraph viewer in the chat. I'm going to install it right now while we're waiting for this because it's that good. Download. Not this one. So there's one for actually, this one's for Visual Studio. There's one for DevOps itself. It's pretty handy. Like basically what I'm doing is that PR process that I mentioned is, so when we create the export branch and then open up the PR, in our export process, we don't run the Power Apps checker, but in the PR process, we've got a build policy that says when there's an incoming package, we've got a PR build attached to our PR and it runs there and gives the Seraph report in a nice readable format there. So it's part of the PR process, which is quite handy. Gary, you tried. Now you owe me a beer and we're even. Okay, here's our Seraph viewer build tab. I'll just grab this link here and I think this is the one. Meanwhile, how's our release doing? Not bad. Good stuff. So let's see if I take a look at my pipeline. So that one that I just ran, the build solution, should now show scans. So this will show me my report, which is nice. A lot better than looking at a weird XML file. So I recommend that. That's a nice little addition as well. And then, yeah, like I said, I really like having this as part of the PR process. Also in my pipelines, what I generally do, like I said, I use the multi-stage YAML pipelines, and I have a stage which I call a developer gate. And what it does is it prompts the developer to look at a couple of different places, like some logs. So if they're doing a data import, they look at the logs for the data import, and they look at the Power Apps checker to make sure that there's nothing out of sorts. So that's kind of a nice thing I like to put in place as well. So it acts like an environment So we've got an approval gate on it, and they do a spot check before they allow it into any environments. So this report is warnings shown in the Power Apps editor. So we pick out delegation warnings. I think so. So full disclosure, Gary, I am not super familiar with what is in here. I just know how to use it. So I know how to get the results. I know how to display it in a nice manner. I haven't really picked through this in detail because I've been focused on automation rather than the actual app itself. This should be deployed now. Oh, not quite. Come on. There's one more thing I want to show on this. Okay, here we go. Okay, so it's deployed. Let's take a look at this build environment. Sorry, not the build environment, the QA environment. So I'm going to go back to make here, and I'm going to bring up QA. Go to apps. So now we have our conference admin apps. We don't have our event app. What gives? Let's look at our solution. Conference. So this is our warning. You cannot directly edit components within a managed solution. Great, that's what we want. Now here's our event scheduler app. It's our Canvas app. And we can't see it in apps. So why? Let's take a look at the more commands here. Weird, I'm not seeing any of the options I'd normally see here. I can't see share. So something is up. Well, this app, if you look at the owner, this is our application app registration. This is our service principal. So because our service principal deployed it, it's the owner. And because of that, we can't reassign, we can't share, we can't reassign ownership, and we can't share through the web interface. So this is where we had to have some fun with, where is it? Yep, here. Set Canvas app owner and sharing is my script here. And what this does is it logs us into the Microsoft PowerShell administration tools. And we grab the environment, we grab any of the Power Apps that have a service principal owner. We look up our own account, so or whatever account we want to set as the new owner. We can also set a group as a viewer. That's an option here that it takes in. And then we loop through any apps that we found and reassign them to the owner that we've specified, and also assign the viewer group if we've supplied that. So this is a fun one. I had a good time working on that. I didn't. It was very frustrating. So I'm going to run this from my terminal here. So I'm not setting a group. Oh, what is going on? Pasted something funny. Oh, I'm missing a quote. So this is going to prompt me with that same OAuth dialog here. I'm going to log in using my credentials. So then I'm going to reassign ownership of that Canvas app.
So we couldn't just run this as a script at the end of the release?
No, because you can't do it with a service principal. So if you had so I'm used to, this is a false error message here, just so everybody's aware. This would have worked. So I'm used to all the accounts. Right now I'm working with a tenant that doesn't have MFA turned on. If I had MFA turned on, I would have got prompted for MFA when I logged in with that dialog right there. So if you put that in a pipeline and tried to supply credentials, MFA would say, no, you can't. If you try and do it with service principal, it fails because the tools don't support it. So you're pretty much stuck running a manual script when you deploy Canvas app. So somebody with sufficient permissions has to run things from their own terminal using their own account.
Is this just the first time you deploy the Canvas app, but then updates to it later will?
No. every time.
No fun.
So something to be aware of, but luckily for you, for everyone who's joined here, you get some of my work for free. You're welcome.
Yay!
So here's my event
What do you
scheduler.
mean by
So
some?
a lot of my work for free. So the event scheduler is now available here, and I'm going to grant it access here to the couple things it does, and here it is. This is great. It's working. Okay, now I'm going to super quickly get through our next two things. So the next thing we want to do is data export and data import. So I'm going to build two pipelines in record speed, and they're small pipelines, so they shouldn't take much. So I should be able to just build two little pipelines here that just basically run some PowerShell. If I'm moving too fast, it's all recorded. Okay, so let's get PowerShell. PowerShell going. So this one is going to export the data package. I'm copying from, I've got all my notes in OneNote, so, and that doesn't copy over cleanly, so I have to put it in VS Code first, trim it. It's not very fun. Okay, so that's the first piece. I also need to go into the job here and give access to the OAuth token again and set up two variables. So we're going to have a variable called solution name. Conference app, and we're also going to put a URL in here. So I'm gonna copy paste this. Data export environment URL. So this is doing the data export. So this is going to pick up data out of our environment and move it around. Okay, that's what we need there. We're then going to publish. So you might think this is a funny order of operations because I'm going to put PowerShell right after this again. That's because I want this to happen quickly so I can dig into problems as things are happening. Okay, publish build artifacts, and then I want to extract. I had a really weird issue using the graphical pipelines where it wouldn't run extract archive PowerShell commandlet. That was very odd. Okay, so that's okay. This is going to take, so what this is doing is what we talked about, exporting a data package. So, oh, I meant to do something over on the variables tab here. So I'm going to add a variable group. So we're going to bring in our variable group with the client ID, client secret that we set up previously. And we use that here to build a connection string. So this is our connection string that we use with Sean's nice XRM data PowerShell commandlets here. And this basically sets up our connection and then exports a data file. So this does the same function or very similar functionality. It's not perfectly exact the same, but it works like the configuration migration utility. Path to publish, build artifact staging directory, that is good. Extract files, so we're going to take the archive file pattern, which is data.zip, and we are going to, again, put it into our sources directory. And we're going to clean. This last one is going to commit our data files again. So this is very similar to how we export the solution code. We export solution data, the data that's necessary for like seed data essentially. Okay, so I think we're good to go here. Did I miss anything? I want to name this export data. Queue this. While that's running, we'll work on the next one. So, of course, it's going to give me a headache here. New pipeline. We're going to call this one import data. You know what? It's funny. I'm realizing that I needed a file in source control so that export would work because we haven't given it a schema to export with. So I'm going to build this out quickly and then we'll grab a schema really quickly from configuration migration. Okay, this one, this data import. So this is called, yep, good. We set up our variables, solution name. This one we're going to call target environment URL. Conference app is our solution name. Target environment URL is going to be QA. So we're not going to deal with the build environment for just simplicity's sake. With data, we're just going to go directly into QA. Data import. And wire up our variable group again so we can build our connection string. Good. And then over here, we're going to archive our file. So we're going to zip up that code from source. So we're not going to prepend. And then archive file to create will be binaries data zip. Good. So that's good. So that gets us our package, our data package. Then we're going to back up again. Come on. Okay, there it is. So always backing up before we do anything stateful to our environment. PowerShell. And the last thing we do here is we publish our artifact. Okay, PowerShell is doesn't copy paste cleanly, so let's get that going. This was a last minute change I made. I'm like, oh, I'll put this all in OneNote. It'll be great. Just one document to follow along with. That was a mistake. All right. Import data. Backup environment. We're going to use the QA service connection. Nope. Now we're going to use the QA service connection. Oh. Let's try that again. Uh-oh. This is not looking good. Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Not behaving for me. Oh no. Okay.
Oh,
all right.
A network error. Oh, perfectly good network error.
Yeah,
There is a
okay.
problem with the in the Azure DevOps with pipelines right now, so that might be related.
Maybe. We'll give that a minute. So I'm going to load up configuration migration really quickly here. We're going to create a schema. I think this is what I want. Yes. Okay, so I'm going to select from my solution here. So where is my conference solution? And then I'm going to export on my entity. Sorry, I'm going to grab FAQ, select all my fields, add them, save and export. So this generates, I do have a schema file already. Okay, so I've got a schema file, great. I don't need to regenerate that. That's the same one. Same one here. Basically what I'm going to do at this point is I'm just going to drag this into DevOps. So it's looking for, if we look back up here at our script, it's looking for a schema file here in, where is it? So I'm looking at my schema, at my script here. It's looking for it in sources directory. So that's the root of our Git /data /solution name /data schema.xml. Am I going to be able to get out a magnifier? I did it. All right. So I'm going to throw that in that directory. So data /solution name data-schema. So we're going to create a folder here. So data /conference app. And then our file name is going to be called data-schema.xml. And that's what we got out of the configuration migration utility. I'm actually just going to cheat here. It's already in front of me. I'm going to open it with code. Pretty simple schema. Copy that. Just going to dump it in here into my main branch and commit it. Now this would have failed. It would have failed if UI wasn't so broken. We'll get back to import. Maybe. Looks like it saved this time, so that's okay. Oh yeah, good, it's back. Okay, so we'll come back to this in a second. Go look at that export pipeline. It would have failed for sure because it didn't have a schema file. So we're going to run it again. It's going to have the schema file this time, so it's going to be happy and export our data the way we expect. And this does the same thing as as what we had before with the solution. So it exports it to a new branch. So we have a data export branch so we can examine the data that's coming in as well. Close that tab. Okay, so data import, I think we're almost done here. So we've got a backup, we've got our import script, and we're publishing. Looks like we're good. So I think this is ready to run too. So this is the last piece. This is importing data. So we will let the export run. We will then, as soon as the export's done, we'll queue this and let it run. In the meantime, I want to show you one last tidbit. There's, anybody has played with this, I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts. This is something I ran across. I didn't realize it existed, but there is a test suite that they're now building into Power Platform, into Power Apps. So if I go back to my dev environment, go to my apps, we'll load up that Canvas app, the event scheduler. Oops, I actually didn't want to do that. I wanted to edit it. So we'll edit this event scheduler. Lots of waiting. Great, our data export worked. So now I'm going to import. Multitasking here. hoping nothing fails. So this is our import. So this is going to import it from source control. So let's take a quick look here at source before I queue this. It is speedy tonight.
Always the way.
Yeah. This is still getting things ready. Okay, thank you. I think my machine's mad at me too. Okay, so in main, we now have, we had our conference app and data schema, but there should be another branch here from our export activity. Yeah, so 114. So if I look at the 114 branch, in conference app, we now have a data folder with our data schema and our data. So we've got a record in here, which is great. So basically what we did is we picked up our one record from our development environment and we're going to deploy that to QA. So did I kick off that build? Did it import? No, I did not. Okay, so we've checked. We know what's in there is good in our export conference app 114 branch. Normally I'd call this export data. You can call it whatever you want. So this will queue, this will push a record into our FAQ in our QA environment. So if I went and looked at our QA environment currently, and let's just go, maybe we can beat it. See it appear. Multitasking is starting to eat me alive now. This is very unresponsive as well. Which is why I'm trying to do more and it's weird, my machine doesn't like it. So the event scheduler here, if I bring it up in QA, I'm hoping I beat the import pipeline, but I doubt it at this point. So the FAQ should have been, it should have been empty. No data came in with our original solution. And we just importing one record that brought in one FAQ. Yeah, we're not going to beat it. Or maybe we did. There are no records. So Gary just linked to Test Studio, which is the other thing I was attempting to show. Oh, good, it failed. Well, that's good. We actually do get to see it before and after. Backup failed. Oh, yes, I missed putting the Power Platform tool installer. So, okay, so there is no record in here. Great, there's no FAQ. I'm going to fix my glaring omission in this pipeline. We'll run it again quickly and see that record come in. And in the meantime, we will look at that Power Platform Test Suite tool installer. Drag this up to the top. We'll queue this again. Okay, so this should get us across the finish line with our data, which is great. And I like that I can actually show before and after. That's nice. And then here, so this is back in our dev environment. We're looking at the Canvas app. I'm going to go to Advanced Tools down here, and you'll see that there's tests, experimental. It's going to prompt me to set a flag, I believe, once it's done loading this up. Just a settings flag to enable testing, or I might already have set it eventually. But basically, this is a little test recorder. It doesn't work very well with, it doesn't work at all with components, and like this event scheduler is using components, but it is quite interesting either way. So I don't want to overwhelm my system right now. So I'm just going to make sure that this is, I'd like to see this complete before I start opening more heavy tabs. I mentioned earlier that I'm running everything in parallel. So sometimes when I stress my machine too much, I can feel it really start slowing down. It's running our backup. I'm going to close a few things here because we don't really need them anymore. So Test Studio, I actually am going to run the record here because it is pretty interesting. It gives you a full graphic recording utility in the browser, which is quite nice. So basically everything you interact with on screen gets recorded, and you have these individual steps. Now you'll see as soon as if I hit FAQ, it's going to tell me testing in components is not supported. So that's a little downside, but at least we can interact with the non-component items here and record our test scripts. So then when I click done, I come back and I've got my select statements or select actions here that allow us to interact with our app and put test cases together. So this is interesting. I've only really played with it at this level, so I don't really know what's involved, but this is interesting. Thought I'd draw attention to it. And let's save that. Why not? Just a little fun bonus there. Not a lot of substance. The substance was really in moving the solutions and data around. So our data import is completed. So now if I go back to our QA environment and I refresh the QA, drum roll please, bring this back up, and we should have one FAQ record in here. There it is. What does FAQ mean? And it's just the definition of FAQ. So we did it. We took a solution, we figured out how to move it around using service principles to not have MFA trip us up. We took the solution out of a dev environment. We basically converted it or packaged it from unmanaged to managed. We deployed it to our QA environment. We then took our data out of our dev environment and deployed it automatically to our QA environment, and all of it was source controlled. So that's the main piece of what we wanted to do and what we wanted to accomplish here. So that is pretty much it. I'm going to switch over to slides again. Any questions or comments before I move away from the actual demoing? Does anybody want to see anything else? Is there anything that I might have moved too fast on or missed or anything along those lines? No, silence is golden. Okay, give me 1 second here and I will bring up slides again. DevOps demos are very interesting to me because I'm used to demoing code. When I demo code, I do very little prep. I make sure the basics of what I demo works. When I demo for DevOps, the amount of prep that goes into these presentations is huge compared to what I do when I'm demoing code. Okay, so
we appreciate it.
Thank you. I felt very prepared coming into this, so it felt nice. Usually I'm just like flying by the seat of my pants, just making stuff up as I go. Because code, I can do that. DevOps, you can't do that. More precision required. So solution export and import, we covered this. So being able to export from the development instance, commit and PR. Like I didn't demo PR, it's very easy to do. There's a DevOps task for it. So we could have really dropped that in and had a PR opened right from that build. Then the building packaging, so that's from the build environment. And like we kind of talked about. There is some back and forth on that, and you can either export it directly as managed, or you can use the build environment, export it directly as managed from your dev environment, or you can use the build environment to kind of convert it. And then you can also, you also of course want to deploy it to your target environment. So we walked through all those steps. So that was the solution export import demo. So then data, again, we just briefly buzzed on the configuration migration piece, but the configuration migration utility that comes with the SDK is pretty essential for being able to interact with data and building your schemas. Gary had talked about the Fetch XML editor that's built into the XRM toolbox. Very important to use those two tools in conjunction. The XRM toolbox you can use to build your Fetch XML to filter what's coming back. So you actually bake those XML queries into your schema so that when you export, you're only getting the exact data you want, which is perfect. The other thing that I didn't really touch on when we were talking about data, you can package data into what's called you can take your data and your solution and package them into a solution package, which has, it's actually a Visual Studio solution, and it's a C# solution. And you have various hooks to various events when you're deploying the solution. And that's pretty interesting and allows some more extensibility points and flexibility if you need to like manipulate data as you're putting it in, and there's all kinds of different things. I haven't played with it super extensively, mostly because the documentation was very thin around it. Happy to hear from anybody who's interacted with those packages because they look very powerful. I'm not sure if they're going to be around for much longer though. Kind of by the looks of it, they look like they're going to go by the wayside. That was that demo. And then we talked about Testing Studio and how to run it from a YAML pipeline. So Microsoft has some guidance on that. And that's it. And that was my presentation, and that's where you can find me. And if anybody has any questions, happy to hear from you now.
Thank you very much, Dylan. Any questions?
Thank you.
All right.
No question.
Again, the next.
Thank you.
The next user group.
Thank you. Thank you guys. Very, very useful.
Thank you again. The next meetup is going to be a month from now, and it's going to be on container promotion pipelines by the guys at, I think the guy is actually a JFrog or something. So it should be interesting. Hopefully we'll see you there. And like I said before, if there's any topics you would like to hear on or present to us, please let us know. We're going to do our best to make it happen. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks very much, Dylan. That was awesome. Great demo.
Thanks. It was a little long, a little fast and furious. Took a little longer than I'd like, but yeah, I think it worked out well. Thank you.
But we have the movie.
Yeah, it's true.
And the recording, again, I'm going to process it today. I'm going to put it on the YouTube channel, and I'm going to put a link on this meetup page in discussions, just like I usually do. Okay?
Beautiful. Awesome. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Appreciate it.
Thank
Good
you.
night, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.